and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu have adopted the Namaste, which has become now a universal greeting thanks to the corona. Life has become more flexible and we have all adapted to new realities. At first, the shift to ICT tools was willy-nilly. One was not too inclined towards it. But now we are slowly honing our skills in the digital space. You have more and more conferences, more and more webinars. The work from home mode has somewhat eased the tension of pressing deadlines, breathing fire down our necks to a more relaxed time schedule, adjusting to the COVID constraints. Humanity is more cautious of precautions, hygiene, sanitization. Due to health safety concerns, so many innovations are slowly turning this millennium into a robotized one. It is said that French President Macron's residence has a corona oven invented by a Bangalore startup called Log9 Materials. It is a disinfecting oven which can keep all germs, bacteria, and viruses at bay. The air is thus getting pollution-free. Humanoid robots such as RoboJulia will be able to serve 3 tables at a time, and Robo DiCaprio shall man reception desks. And these robots also are made in India by a Gurgaon unit. And for introverts and misanthropes, the new contactless and faceless normal nowadays gladdens their hearts as all wear masks. So the need to greet, smile, talk, or engage into a conversation is much less a compulsion now. In fact, far from the madding crowd and comfortably working in the secure space of their homes, the introverts have presently gained a new courage in this virtual world and even transformed themselves into bold speakers while facing their computer screens. Moreover, language is also getting revitalized with new portmanteau words such as smiles, which is a combination of smile and eyes, when a masked face seems to indicate smiling eyes, which are the only features visible to show a semblance of welcome. Now you must be wondering what's the connection with my title. Well, now in the somewhat resigned state to the pandemic, what happens to the gender parity? In comparison to women leaders have successfully minimized the effect of COVID-19 as proved in Taiwan, Germany, New Zealand, Denmark, Finland. However, in the general scenario, women are more acutely affected by the socio-economic impacts and will have to bear the brunt of corona. More job retrenchment, less pay, more incidents of domestic violence or rape. Hence, over the centuries, whatever be the seeming progress or regress, there is always an underlying gender inequality which sometimes takes a toll on the physical and mental health of women when they are caught between the pulling forces of tradition and modernity. I will just illustrate this divisive quandary by taking the example of Kenza, the female protagonist of Cécile Oumani's francophone novel, Odeur de Henné, meaning a scent of henna, first published in
Nalini ma'am, the PPT is not visible.
Not visible?
Can you share it once again, ma'am?
Yeah, sure.
It went off momentarily.
1 second, I'll just get back to it.
If you are screen sharing on your system, you stop the sharing and start it again.
Yeah.
I request the participants to pin the presentation of Madam to your screens so that you will be able to see it.
You can see it now?
Yes, it's visible, ma'am.
It's visible. Okay, fine.
Totally visible. Yes. Shreya, you can kindly pin Madam's presentation so it is visible for you. Pin it to this to your screen. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, sure. So I was talking about the divisive quandary between tradition and modernity, and I'll try to illustrate it by taking the example of Kenza, who's a female protagonist of Cécile Omani's francophone novel, Une odeur de henné, meaning a scent of henna, first published in 1999, then republished in 2012, and 8 times more till 2017, which just goes to show how popular the novel is in these contemporary times, since the aspiration for emancipation and a break from impeding social change is a perennial theme. For those who may wonder what exactly is Francophone literature, let me just briefly sketch its significance these days. The term of Francophonie designates, in the socio linguistic sense, the entire population speaking French, or in a geopolitical perspective, it means the total countries where French is spoken. The Francophone world regroups 54 countries, let us say from Egypt to Moldova, or from Canada to Vietnam, or from Mauritius to New Caledonia, about whom Rsri had spoken yesterday, thus spread over the 5 continents in a variety of flavors. The people of these countries are still attached to the French language, culture, and civilization, as most of them had been educated in the French educational system. So, nowadays, French is no longer the language of France alone, for it has gone far beyond the frontiers of the hexagon that France is, as rightly stated by the Senegal president Senghor, who says, I quote, the French language, sun that shines beyond the hexagon, that is, beyond metropolitan France. Or, like the French singer Yves Duteil highlights in his song La langue de chez nous, our language, he says, it has thrown bridges across the Atlantic, it has quit its nest for another land. Elle a jeté les ponts par-dessus l'Atlantique, elle a quitté son nid pour un autre terroir. You can then imagine the French literary landscape changes with the inputs from the various francophone zones, where there used to be only one French literature. Now there are several francophone literatures blossoming across the world, a fact which only underlines the linguistic plurality in a variety of dimensions. The polyphony and broader horizons of the 80s affect an acceptance of Francophone literatures and cultures, and a movement is initiated to welcome their differential aspects. French centralism is thus questioned. There is hereafter an interaction between France and the other Francophone countries, and a new literary and linguistic space is created with books written, published, and appreciated beyond the hexagonal circuits. And it is precisely from this francophone space that Cécile Omani's novel, Une odeur de henné, a scent of henna, emanates in a Tunisian background. Its title evokes a marriage preparation when the bride's hands are decorated with the henna arabesques, and seems to hint how important marriage is in traditional societies, and seems to be the end all and be all of everything. The writer Cécile Omani comes from a multicultural background, and she is very proficient in English and French, as she was born in Belgium. Her mother was of Belgian and Scottish origins, and her father was French. She became quite conversant with the traditions and culture of the Arab world when, through marriage, she slowly developed strong personal links with Tunisia. In 2014, she was awarded the Prix Virgile Européen Francophone for her entire work. Her novel, L'Atelier des Trésors, got a special nomination for the Franco-Indian Gitanjali Literary Prize in 2012, which was awarded in Pondicherry, in fact. She also got the Prix Afrique Méditerranéenne Maghreb Adel 2016 for her novel Tunisian Yankee, and was a finalist for the 2017 Prix Joseph Kessel. Right from childhood, the main protagonist in Ccllrm's novel, A Scent of Henna, Kenza, feels totally different from her tradition-bogged mother or classmates whom she refuses to emulate. As you can see from the initial quotation, that she doesn't want to be within the margins. She inherits a love for books from her father, and her reading gives her a wider perspective and a knowledge to escape from age-old conventions in her Tunisian milieu. She revolts against the condition of women destined to marry, beget children, and take care of the household. She knows that long studies will temporarily delay marriage, and she finally becomes a doctor in a countryside hospital at Benissa. She gets an offer to go to Paris for a year to further her research project. But meanwhile, her parents find her a young man, Sami, who fortunately likes her forward attitude and allows her to pursue her research, but on the condition that Kenza gets engaged to him before leaving for Paris. It is indeed an offer she cannot refuse, as this engagement will please her parents and her fiancé, and also enable her to go to France for a year, far from all binding traditions. But strangely, in Paris, Kenza feels ill at ease with the unbridled freedom everyone seems to enjoy there. She befriends the Egyptian girl Faten and feels comfortable in a somewhat cocooned world. However, when the French girl Claire tries to entice her out of this closeted circle and introduces Kenza to a painter friend, Jacques. Kenza cannot help but notice that Jacques is fascinated by her calm, exotic looks, and slowly she realizes that she too is attracted towards him. She tries to resist that spell by inflicting pain on herself in order to dispel the guilt and temptation of a taboo relationship to Jacques, who does not belong to her community, while all along she's engaged to a caring Sami, who allowed her to go alone to Paris, is part and parcel of her original surroundings in Tunisia, and has the same cultural background. In a bit of self-mortification, she cuts her palm while crushing a cup to pieces so as to quell her frenetic thoughts and exorcise through pain her budding awakening to passion. What a misfortune that this womanly body's space does not belong to her, but to the men whenever they decide it. It's a quote from the book. In French, Malheur que ce corps de femme dont l'espace ne lui appartient pas, qui n'est qu'à eux lorsqu'ils le décident. Unquote. Since Jack particularly likes her silky hair, Kenza chops off its beautiful curls in a symbolic parting gesture, cutting her off from tantalizing attraction. This attempt to appear unattractive and lose appeal is also a refusal to be objectified as a pretty doll meant only for sensual pleasures. Hereafter, Kenza will consciously cover her uneven hair with a scarf and dress in a black shapeless tunic like her radical acquaintance Bajia. So, unexpectedly, in a sort of inadvertent atavism, Kenza seeks refuge in this new sartorial traditional camouflage, which she had willfully avoided in her native Tunisia. She now feels shielded from the male gaze and somewhat secure thus actually hiding her vulnerability and trying to conceal herself so as not to be detected in a kind of cryptic behavior to lie low and be inconspicuous. She deliberately ignores Jacques and keeps him at bay. Kenza's veil and long, baggy dress indicate that her body is a sacred space, far from any desecrating touch or vile look. And I quote, she took to this way of dressing to protect herself from Jacques and herself. In French, elle a pris ses habits pour se protéger de Jacques et d'elle-même. Unquote. Kenza hereafter avoids all friends and totally withdraws into herself. After the successful completion of her research, Kenza returns to her native Tunisia a year later, where her father, Ahmed, and her fiancé, Sami, are somewhat surprised to see her in her new avatar with a scarf and long tunic. Her father controls his irritation on discovering that his daughter seems to thus openly flout his secular stance. As for Sami, he had always been attracted by modernity and Kenza's aura of freedom from the usual traditional ways. Hence, he now taunts her. I quote, "So now you have started wearing a scarf. It, however, was never your style. I didn't know that one dressed like this in the research circles in Paris." In French, alors, tu mets le foulard maintenant? Ce n'était pourtant pas ton style. Je ne savais pas qu'on s'habillait comme ça dans les milieux de la recherche à Paris. Unquote. Kenza then realizes that her choice to wear a scarf and long black tunic has another resonance in her native surroundings. Actually, in 1956, after Tunisia became independent, it undertook solid measures to liberate women from all fetters, including the frightful shroud of the veil, as the Tunisian President Bourguiba termed it. Women had now easy access to education and entered the professional scene. In the 1980s, veiled women were discriminated against. Headscarves, known as hijabs, were considered as anti-democratic and sectarian symbols in the Tunisian secular state and as signs of religious oppression and social backwardness. She remembers how in the past she had been horrified by such tradition-bound ways. She had fiercely claimed her right to education. She had strongly expressed her will to go to Paris for research and postpone her marriage by a year. Kenza had always been close to her grandmother, Khatija, who never had worn a veil or scarf. She learns now that her mentoring grandma had passed away during her absence. Kenza now wants to only retain her fond memories of the past when her fiercely independent grandma had molded her bold spirit and her intellectual curiosity. Kenza is finally shaken from her willful sartorial camouflage by her mother Zina, who recalls Grandma Khadija. And I quote, the mother says, "What do you esteem she would have thought? She who was a mountain Bedouin who had never worn the veil of the village women." And in French, "Que crois-tu qu'elle aurait pensé, elle, la Bédouine de la montagne, qui n'a jamais porté le voile des villageoises?" Unquote. Her fiancé Sami also warns her bluntly, and he says, "When I got acquainted with you, you were normal. I mean, you dressed like most women of your age. That's why I liked you. So if you want to marry me, you will have to remove your headscarf." In French, "Quand je t'ai connu, tu étais normal. Enfin, tu t'habillais comme la plupart des femmes de ton âge. C'est ce qui m'avait plu en toi. Alors, si tu veux te marier avec moi, il faut que tu enlèves ton foulard." Unquote. She receives one last letter from Jacques, her Parisian admirer, and she promptly cuts it into pieces without even reading it. And while mutilating this epistle, the scissors hurt her index finger, again probably in self-mortification to escape the tantalizing lure of Jacques. It is said that all emanates from the waters, including birth as well as rebirth. Finally, on a visit to the beach, which her grandma also liked, Kenza returns to her original emancipated spirit, freeing herself of all traditional patriarchal shackles by throwing away her headscarf to the sea waves and shedding her shapeless tunic on the sand so as to plunge unhindered into the soothing waters in just her t-shirt and slacks. The flowing waters of the sea welcome Kenza in a maternal embrace and thus seem to release her from the physical and psychological weight which had burdened her till now. She comes out all drenched and goes further to lay down under the shade of palm tree, not at all concerned about the gaze of a young man who glances at her totally soaked, silhouetted body. And I quote, she now feels no discomfort at this look. She thinks only about the infinite sky which rests on the sea, about this destiny which she holds in her hands. In French, elle n'en ressent aucune gêne. Elle ne pense qu'à l'infini du ciel qui repose sur la mer, à ce destin qu'elle tient entre ses mains. Unquote. So Kenza is now reconciled with her femininity, which she had feared and suppressed for so long, and hereafter her body will transmit the pleasure of living, feeling, and loving without any impulse to inflict pain on it to quell passion. Thus, Kenza reassumes her modern self in a deliberate break from her Parisian sojourn, where she wanted to keep a low, unnoticeable profile, and she retains only the sense of freedom her grandma and France had given her. Kenza resolves all her contradictory behavioral perplexities, and she emerges as a woman who boldly decides her own terms to always remain different in her surroundings and carve her own independent path in life's journey in another form of Jasmine revolution against autocratic shackles and patriarchal diktats. Ccllrm's writing too effectively brings about this difference in a subversion of the banal forms in order to highlight a singular voice, lest it get lost in the sea of indistinct clamor. As Ccllrm rightly says, I quote, for a book to please me, there must be a quest in the writings. These novels, more or less narrated, bore me. It is banal, ordinary. What evokes an interest is to find a writing, a will to subvert the forms, to shake them up so as to rejoin the singularity of an unusual voice. I quote in French, pour qu'un livre me plaise, il faut qu'il y ait la quête d'une écriture. Ces romans plus ou moins racontés m'ennuient. C'est banal, c'est ordinaire. Ce qui est intéressant, c'est de rencontrer une écriture, une volonté de subvertir les formes, de les bousculer afin de rejoindre la singularité d'une voix. And the last slide on the PPT just shows symbolically what it is to be a woman and a woman in flight, free from shackles. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was a very enlightening and thought-provoking lecture. I'm sure we have a lot to take away from that.
Thank you so much.
Very, very interesting as well. If any of the participants would like to ask ma'am any questions, you can proceed to ask.
This is the moment when everybody will look away or look at the ceiling. You're even free to ask any clarification if some points were not very clear. So I think I take it that everything was very clear, so no questions.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for gracing us with your presence for this keynote lecture, as well as throughout the conference right from yesterday. Uh, a very familiar name has popped into all the sessions, even the Japanese one, and that was Dr. Nalini. Thank you so much for your support. Without that, we would have been without that moral support which was necessary to make this a success. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
And with that, I kindly request you all to stay here in the session for the final paper presentation session in French.